Hey, welcome to SI Now. It is Monday, August 14th. I'm Maggie Gray alongside Robin Lundberg. And we wish we could be starting off this week on a more uplifting and positive note, but the entire nation, including the world of sports, had their attention on the protests in Charlottesville, Virginia that turned deadly over the weekend. Here's a smattering of tweets from the sports world. Enes Kanter of the Oklahoma City Thunder said, "America only needs one torch. It's bigger and brighter than yours." Of course, referring to Lady Liberty. Eagles defensive end and Charlottesville native, lived there for a long time, went to UVA. Chris Long said he hates these images. This isn't Seville. The tantrum will be over soon. Hashtag insecurity. And LeBron James tweeting in, "It's sad what's going on in Charlottesville. Is this the direction our country is heading? Make America great again, huh?" He said that. Moving on, our youth deserves better, flat out.
Of course, guys are reacting to this. Athletes are reacting to this. Athletes are human beings, and I'd like to think that any right-minded person was disgusted by what took place over the weekend. It was a tragedy, and it was shameful. And for these guys to hold back would be expecting something almost, not human. That your human reaction is to express your thoughts on something like this. But LeBron James in particular to me was interesting because he associated the president with it. And we've had a lot of discussions about protests and athlete activism and the like. And I think, quite frankly, some of those conversations are a bit intellectually dishonest if they're not done with the context of who's running the country.
Well, listen, I think LeBron James is coming from a place of power, and we're seeing that not just in, this is not a political issue to me, this is a right and wrong issue, but he's become, one of the voices of this generation of athletes, if not the marquee voice, because of his reach, because of just how strong he's been in his voice. And I do think that narrowing the focus, to just say in a tweet exactly what you mean, not just we have to condemn the violence that's happening in Charlottesville. While that is powerful, but getting it very specific, I think is something that I wonder if just because he's so influential, he's so secure in his place in the sports world, if he feels like he can be that pointed.
And you were right when you just said, I don't think this is left or right or wrong, right? So why should one fear the backlash of wrong, right? If you are in the position of right, and we all agree in this room and beyond, hopefully, then why should there be a fear of speaking your mind and speaking up for what's right? Isn't that what we're taught to do? Isn't that a sense of pride and integrity?
Well, the Seahawks Pro Bowl defensive end Michael Bennett's reaction to the violence in Charlottesville was to sit for the National Anthem. Here is Bennett and talking about that backlash that he may receive for taking a seat.
I think last week I was just, with everything that's been going on the last couple of months, and especially after the last couple of days, seeing everything in Virginia, seeing what's going on out there, and earlier today in Seattle, I just wanted to be able to use my platform to be able to continue to speak on injustice.
Do you think you're going to face any backlash?
Of course I'm going to face backlash. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than football. This is bigger than anything that we have any different. This is about people. This is about bringing opportunities to people, giving people equality. This is bigger than a sport. At the end of the day, you can't really take your accolades with you, but what you can do is leave a legacy that you can continuously give kids to seize, to be able to inspire. I don't look at myself as a role model. I look at myself as trying to inspire young children, young people of color, young people of different gender, or young people of different sex, whatever they are, to want to change their environment and continuously push whatever they think is right.
Of course, Marshawn Lynch also sat for the anthem during the Raiders preseason game against Arizona. Now, according to head coach Jack Del Rio, Lynch says he's been sitting for the anthem his entire career. Perhaps we should have seen this coming. Lynch, who barely talks to the media, had this to say on Conan O'Brien's show in September of 2016.
Colin Kaepernick has, lots of opinions out there about what he is doing, taking a knee during a national anthem. What are your thoughts? I really respect your opinion. What do you think?
With what's going on, I'd rather see him take a knee than stand up, put his hands up, and get murdered. So, my take on it is It got to start somewhere, and if that was the starting point, I just hope people open up their eyes to see that it's really a problem going on, and something needs to be done for it to stop.
Okay, Robin, do you think that Marshawn Lynch and Michael Bennett will receive that same scrutiny that Colin Kaepernick has?
No, I don't think so, and for two reasons. One, because Kaepernick became the face of it. So everybody else, I mean, there were other people that protested last year. None of them received the same vitriol as Colin Kaepernick. And then the second point relates to what we were saying about Charlottesville. I think most people at this point have to at least be empathetic to the issues and the cause that these guys are raising. And you hear them eloquently put it and articulately put it out there. And it's hard to argue against it. Perhaps, we can have a conversation about the way it's being done and maybe get somewhere. I'm not sure. But does that really matter to the root issue here? And I'd like to think, quite honestly, if I was in Bennett's position, I would do something similar.
I also think that they are not going to receive the same scrutiny. I agree with you that because Kaepernick really has become the face of this, that he is going to, almost like an airbag, take the impact more than anyone else who necessarily comes after him. I never knew that Marshawn Lynch was sitting for the anthem. Turns out that he would stay in the locker room sometimes for the anthem and wouldn't be on the sidelines for that. But I also think that this is something that Bruce Arians said when he came to Sports Illustrated on his book tour. I asked him, did you guys inquire about Colin Kaepernick? This is after they signed Blaine Gabbert as a backup quarterback. And he said, we did, but he's not worth the distraction if he's not going to be the starter. And because Marshawn Lynch and Michael Bennett are absolutely immaterial to the teams, you can't imagine the Raiders this year now without Lynch. He's going to get a lot of carries. Michael Bennett, obviously a starter. The fact that they are so needed on their teams football-wise, that means that I think coaches, owners, management, everything, they're not going to be afraid of any potential fan backlash that comes their way because they need these guys on the football field so much. Is that right? Absolutely not. Is that the way I see this going down? Yes.
Yeah, I think also with Kaepernick, you're completely correct in the sense that he wasn't at the top of his game, at least in perception, or at the top of the depth chart for the quarterbacks there. But we are at a point now where you're sort of seeing the inverse of the backlash, where the original backlash was about Kaepernick's stance, and now there is the backlash about Kaepernick not having a job. So a lot more people are coming around to what Kaepernick was trying to express and what a lot of these other guys are now trying to express.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. You and I were talking before the show about, how this is going to also impact the sports world, which is White House visits. And, after what we saw in Charlottesville, I would be very, very surprised if we didn't have the next champion, which will probably actually would be the World Series champion, if they decided to go to the White House here. Because like I said, this is not in Charlottesville a political issue, but there is something about right and wrong and whether or not you believe the president is standing up for right.
Yeah, I mean, there are different demographics for each sport, whether it comes to the fan base or who constitutes the rosters. But people have to stop pretending like there isn't a specific reason White House visits are being brought up right now. And I'd be personally disappointed if the champions of a sports league continue to go to the White House.
Of course, the other big story in the world of football was Ezekiel Elliott's 6-game suspension. We spoke about it with Albert Breer of the MMQB earlier today.
Turning to the big NFL news from Friday, Ezekiel Elliott suspended 6 games by the league for violating its personal conduct policy as a result of an investigation into domestic violence allegations against Elliott made by an ex-girlfriend. We welcome in the MMQB's Albert Breer to discuss. Of course, Albert, Zeke expected to fight this suspension. Do you expect it to be reduced at all on appeal?
I think the best case scenario, Robin, is that there's some sort of conditional reduction, which is sort of like what Ben Roethlisberger had a number of years ago, where he meets certain conditions and then maybe it's knocked down to 4 or 3 games. I think the problem that Zeke faces here, this is really about an accumulation of events and about a pattern of behavior, but it falls under the domestic violence heading. And after what the NFL went through with Ray Rice and more recently with Josh Brown and under-punishing guys, I think it'd be foolish of them to make that mistake again. And that's why it's 6 games to begin with. And that's why I can't imagine going through the NFL's appeals process that's going to be knocked down much, because again, this is an area that's a very sensitive one right now for the league in general.
And of course, one that the league ignored basically for many years and is now trying to make up ground for. Meanwhile, on the field, though, Albert, the Cowboys were the favorites to win the NFC East. So how does this impact that futures bet?
Well, I'll tell you what, Maggie, the big thing here is, where the defense is. And I know that sounds funny. I think the offense will still be good. They've got other issues, too. I mean, obviously, Dak going into year 2, everybody's got a book on him. And then, there's going to be 2 new starters on the offensive line. Lyle Collins switching over to right tackle, and then they got to fill the left guard spot. So there are some questions, but you look at the talent there. I mean, with Tyron Smith and Travis Frederick and Zach Martin and Jason Witten and Des Bryant and Cole Beasley, there's enough there to still be good. I think the question is whether or not they're going to be good enough to carry what should be a defense in transition in the early parts of the season. They lost almost their entire secondary from last year. They're going to be relying on rookies like Awuzie and Lewis back there on the back end. And then the pass rush is a major question with some of the suspensions, most notably to David Irving, that they're going to be dealing with early in the year. And so I don't think you're going to see the offense fall off the table completely. But if the offense goes from great to just merely good, is that going to be good enough to carry a defense through what I think most people expect to be some early bumps? That's the biggest question. What could help them here, I don't think the division is going to be quite as good. The Giants had great health last year. Are they going to be as lucky this year? The Eagles have some questions on defense, and the Redskins are replacing both their coordinators, have 2 new starting receivers, and obviously had all of the tumult on the offseason with the switch with the general manager. And so I think the state of the division helps the Cowboys a little bit. And really, this isn't about whether or not the offense is going to fall apart. I don't think that's going to happen. It's going to be whether or not the offense early on is strong enough to carry what should be a young defense going through some bumps.
Now, Elliott's suspension is the 16th received by a member of the Cowboys since 2014. We've talked about the NFL overall, but do the Cowboys themselves have an image problem to work on?
Well, this has been the way it's been forever, though, Robin. You know what I mean? This isn't new. I mean, this goes back to the 90s. They've been willing to take risks on players. And I think the bigger problem for Dallas now is that this stuff tends to happen when they're good. And what I mean by that, well, they haven't had back-to-back playoff years since the 90s. And there's a reason for that. They don't seem to deal with prosperity very well. Go back to 2007. They go 13-3. Well, what do? They load up. They trade for Pac-Man Jones. They bring Tank Johnson back. They pay a bunch of guys. And then the next year, things implode. 2009, they have a very, very solid year. They win their first playoff game since the Aikman and Emmett and Irvin years. And then they come back the next year, and they play poorly enough over the first half of the season to get their coach fired. 2014, they sense they're getting close again. They roll the dice on Greg Hardy. It all falls apart. So I know that this is something that people in Dallas are sensitive about. You can talk about the global issue with discipline, but I think as much as anything else, it's how when things seem to go well in Dallas, and this is going back over the last decade now, the organization seems to have issues with keeping guys in line. And so that's something that, they're going to be dealing with early in the year, of course. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch how the locker room handles everything that's been kind of put on their plate over the last few months.
We'll definitely see how it plays out very soon. Albert, thanks for joining us this morning.
You got it, guys.
Now, legal expert Michael McCann joins us to talk about Ezekiel Elliott from his vantage point. Michael, the NFL statement on Elliott said, in part, they had, quote, substantial and persuasive evidence supporting a finding that Elliott engaged in physical violence against his former girlfriend, Ms. Thompson, on multiple occasions. Now, many people are curious why no charges were brought by law enforcement if there was evidence. Is it possible the NFL had access to materials or witnesses that the police did not?
Maggie, that is possible, although I think there's a bigger issue at play, and that's the burden. The fact is, in order for law enforcement to charge someone, there has to be probable cause. It's possible that there's some evidence, but not enough for a criminal charge, but the NFL doesn't require that burden. It's really Roger Goodell's call as to whether or not there's enough evidence to find him at fault for a workplace violation, which in this case would be Article 46 of the collective bargaining agreement. So the fact that there's no criminal charge doesn't preclude a finding from Goodell using his own standard, which is probably lower than a criminal standard, that it's appropriate that Elliott be punished.
If you're Elliott's lawyers, what is your approach in trying to get the suspension reduced?
Robin, I think his initial approach will be to go to Roger Goodell, and he has to decide what is the right strategy. If he goes in there and says, I didn't do it, I've done nothing wrong, this is all made up, I don't think Goodell will lower the suspension. If instead he goes in there and says, look, I made some mistakes perhaps, I need to become a better man, I'm going to become a better person. I know I've embarrassed the NFL. I know I've hurt the brand, which is really what Roger Goodell is most interested in. If he takes that strategy, I could see Goodell lowering it to 4 games. But it really depends on how he wants to approach that meeting. If he's defiant, I don't think that's going to help him in terms of getting it lowered.
Michael, if Jerry Jones or Zeke Elliott's lawyers wanted to sue the league over the suspension, how strong would their case be?
Well, Maggie, we know that Jerry Jones has a history of suing the NFL. He did it in the mid-1990s over whether or not he could do his own stadium licensing deals with competitors of the NFL's own sponsors. But here, the problem for Jerry Jones is that when you buy an NFL team, you agree to the league constitution, which makes it abundantly clear that Roger Goodell has final decisions on punishment. So the claim would be hard to craft in a way that would make sense. Now, some people would say, well, what about the Raiders? Didn't Al Davis sue the NFL? Very different story. That's about franchise relocation. Here, this would be about the power of the commissioner. I think Jerry Jones probably contracted that away by virtue of his ownership of an NFL team.
In some other NFL news, Thaddeus Lewis was just signed by the Ravens. Notable as it is another QB spot that's not filled by Colin Kaepernick, of course. Does this become a labor issue for the NFLPA at some point?
Potentially, Robin. So the labor issue would be collusion, and collusion would require evidence that 2 or more teams or the NFL and one team are somehow conspiring to not sign Colin Kaepernick, that they're depriving him of his rights under the collective bargaining agreement. But if it's only team by team, so if the Seahawks and the Patriots and the Cowboys individually say, we don't want Colin Kaepernick, and even if they say it's because we don't agree with his political views, we don't agree with what he's doing, that's not collusion. It requires actual collusion between team executives or others on a team. So that's the tricky part legally, is that Kaepernick would have to show that there's some kind of collusive activity between teams as opposed to them individually deciding for whatever reason they don't want him.
Very interesting. Michael McCann, our legal expert. Appreciate your expertise, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, turning to other football news. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers created a controversy when they drafted kicker Roberto Aguayo in the 2nd round of the 2016 draft. Now, the Bucs cut Aguayo after he missed 1 of 2 field goal attempts and his lone extra point in Tampa Bay's first preseason game. Aguayo quickly claimed off waivers by the Chicago Bears, but Robin, ESPN's Trey Wingo called Aguayo the worst draft pick ever. Is he right?
Absolutely not. I mean, maybe he's the most head-scratching draft pick ever because people are saying, why would you take a kicker at this point in the draft? But worst ever? I mean, you're looking at the Ryan Leafs and the Jamarcus Russells of the world, who were supposed to be franchise changers when they were brought in. They were supposed to be the answer, and they wound up with failures of careers in the most high-profile spots at the very top end of the draft.
See, I think he might have a point here. I think this is the worst because I will never blame an organization for going for it for a quarterback, thinking they are a franchise changer and taking a risk, a big risk, to try to get the most important position on the football field. You really can't find a way to back up a general manager in this case, Jason Light of the Tampa Bay Bucs, for taking this big of a risk on a kicker. I mean, that doesn't make sense. If you're going to try to go all in, try to find the new face of your franchise, swing for the fences on a quarterback, even if it ends up being Ryan Leaf or Jamarcus Russell, I think that is more defensible. You can defend that. It's more defensible than if you try to do this with a kicker. They traded up using the 74th and 106th picks. Those positions in the draft board, those are pieces that you are hoping to find at least contributors to your franchise. Now, Jason Light has said he made a big mistake. He's owning up to it. He's saying it doesn't want to preclude him, though, from taking big risks in the future. I just hope they don't involve kickers.
Yeah, there's one thing I think we can agree on. The pick was no good,
No
right?
good. Wide left and right.
We got a taste of the disputed sparring footage that caused such an uproar as Dana White released a clip of Conor McGregor knocking down Malignaggi. How would you classify this much disputed moment?
Uncomfortable, I guess, is the way I would classify it. I mean, I don't see this as a knockdown so much as Malignaggi basically losing his footing and getting a little tied up and twisted with Conor McGregor. It was like awkward how they were sparring. But I'll say this, I mean, it looked like Conor had some power there. He was definitely moving forward, coming at him, but I'm not going to call that a knockdown. Now, Malignaggi came out and said it was a push down, that he pushed him down. I don't see that. I don't see the push. I see footwork and two guys getting tangled. And if we're being honest, this is probably the best strategy that Floyd's going to have, even though he might, or excuse me, that Conor's going to have, even though he might run into a Floyd right hand. Because he has to keep coming forward. He's going to have to initiate all of the action, and he's got to be prepared to take a couple in the face if he's going to have this type of game plan.
Yeah, of course, this is a very small sample size from the sparring footage, and I don't change my mind at all about McGregor's chances. I think his best strategy is to be as unorthodox as possible. I still don't think he can defend himself against Floyd. As far as what actually transpired, I would go with trip more than anything. Maybe it was the little push that knocked him over, but it looked like their feet got tangled, and that's what caused Malignaggi to fall down. Regardless, I don't think it would ever be classified as a knockdown. And that's important for the semantics of a fight, right?
Sure.
You see this happen in actual boxing matches where a guy hits the canvas and it has to be judged whether it was a knockdown or not. That would not be a knockdown.
No, it would not be a knockdown. But then let's also remember, I mean, this is no disrespect to Malignaggi, but Floyd is a better fighter than Malignaggi, more defensive fighter, completely different style than this. So I don't know if we take a lot from that Instagram. One thing was Conor kept moving forward and forward, and that's what he's going to have to do. And recently, boxing judges have rewarded that type of behavior and those types of fighters, the ones who initiate the action. I just think Conor's going to walk into a few.
Yeah, the problem with that plan, because we've seen that plan with a lot of other guys.
I mean, tried it against
Pacquiao
Floyd.
is an action fighter, right? But it's hard to move forward when you're getting punched in the face.
Yeah, I mean, Zab Judah tried it, didn't work. Turning to baseball, the Washington Nationals got great news yesterday. No ligament damage to Bryce Harper's knee after it buckled when the slugger stepped on a wet first base. Diagnosis is a hyperextended knee. Now, Harper had his sights set on winning his second NL MVP award. Robin, can he still win it?
I think he could still win it depending on how much time he misses. I think the true silver lining, I guess, if you would, for the Nationals here is this wasn't ligament damage. This wasn't structural. He's not out for the season. I mean, if his season ended right now, you could still mention him in the MVP conversation. If he comes back in a few weeks, I don't really think it hurts his chances at all. But more importantly, it doesn't really hurt their chances for the World Series because of where they're at in the race right now and the fact that he should be able to be back out on the field before the playoffs.
Yeah, double-digit lead for them in the division, so they're going to cruise, I think, even with Harper out. Dusty Baker said something about, hey, if he misses 10 days or 2 weeks, we still feel like we're going to be in good shape. I think that keeps them in good shape in the NL MVP race. And yeah, I think that keeps their postseason hopes alive. You have Strasburg, who's making another rehab start tonight. And let's be honest, I mean, this is the time to strike for the Nationals. I know we've been saying that for the last 6 years or so, but this is really it, and here's why. Harper is set to become a free agent after next season. If they don't win it this year, can you imagine the type of pressure that's going to be on that organization to try to either that they're going to have to re-sign Harper, and that's going to be probably the biggest sports contract we've ever seen in our lives, or they're going to have all this pressure to try to win the World Series. I feel like now is just so crucial for the Washington Nationals, and they got great news. But meanwhile, Harper's agent, Scott Boras, very upset after the game because those bases were wet. It was after a 3-hour rain delay. They decided to start the game at 10 p.m. Eastern time. Should baseball look more closely at this?
I think it's a little difficult. That's a high standard to hold. Either you don't play the game or you're going to run the risk of the field being a little bit slippery, a little bit dangerous. I mean, people play football and soccer in muddy fields, and that's an inherent risk of the chance of you getting caught or falling or landing awkwardly. So it's tough. What do you expect them to be able to evaporate every last drop or morsel of water that's on a base?
No, I mean, this is the easiest one for baseball to absolutely solve. I mean, just have guys who come out, the grounds crew, and wipe down the bases in between every half inning. To me, that's just like an absolute no-brainer, and I'm just shocked that they don't even do that stuff now, and it's not mandatory. I mean, if you're coming off of a game that was canceled on Friday night because of rain, then a 3-hour rain delay, and now you don't have someone out there who's specifically looking at the bases, to me, it just seems like an oversight for no reason whatsoever. I think that that's going to become a mandatory rule, and I don't think it's going to be any skin off anyone's backside about it either.
Certainly doesn't harm anyone.
No, why not? Speaking of the MVP race, Irish bookmaker Paddy Power released the first NBA MVP odds for the upcoming season. Reigning MVP Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant are tied at plus 350, followed by Kawhi Leonard at plus 550, James Harden at plus 700, and both LeBron James and the Greek Freak at plus 750. Two-time MVP Steph Curry sits at plus 1,100. Who you got?
I'm working from the betting perspective. I start with the Greek Freak. If Milwaukee takes a step up this year, and he takes even a marginal step up from where he was last year, because his numbers last year were MVP worthy. There were just some other great out-of-this-world performances. He could win it. Kawhi Leonard, I like a lot as well, because he's the one guy on his team, really. You don't think of anyone else in the same realm, while the votes will be cannibalized between James Harden and Chris Paul and between Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. And finally, I think LeBron James has a very good chance to win what would likely be his final MVP under the condition that Kyrie Irving is traded. Let's assume Kyrie Irving is traded and a superstar doesn't come back and return, even if it's depth, but the Cavs wind up about where they were this year, then I could see LeBron taking home another MVP.
Well, and your second point plays into your first, which is I think the voters are going to be more likely to reward guys who are, quote-unquote, doing it alone. And I'm not trying to disparage any teammates on any of these other teams, but I think the Greek Freak is going to get more of a chance, and LeBron James, if Kyrie Irving is traded, will get more of a chance, because you can look at these other teams as all sort of being super teams a little bit in their own right. I mean, I know that Steph Curry was able to win 2 MVPs, but now he's got Kevin Durant there. As you said, they're cannibalized, the votes. I mean, it's going to be harder for the writers and for the voters of the sports media to parse sort of who exactly is responsible and who is the most valuable out of those teams. And now with Russell Westbrook having Paul George alongside of him, I'm surprised that he is actually one of the favorites to win the MVP. I think it's going to be Giannis, and I think that also it's a little bit about narrative, not as much as the NFL MVP, which I think is like a lot about narrative, but NBA is a lot about narrative. And I think that if Milwaukee, who really has not been like a great feel-good story in a long time, they've really been not a factor for a long time. They got the new ownership, they have the new stadium, they have the Greek Freak, he's homegrown, he's their own draft pick. I think that that's going to be rewarded with an MVP.
Speaking of a team that's not a factor, the Miami Marlins have reportedly been sold to the group that includes Derek Jeter for $1.17 billion. Jeter is used to success. Is that possible with this franchise?
Yes, I think so, but a couple things. First of all, you have to commit to some long-term success. The only time that this franchise has won World Series is when they acquire this mass amount of talent, won the World Series, and then sold off all the pieces. They didn't keep a core group together long enough to have a sustained run. The second thing, I think that Jeter, depending on how actually personally involved he is at the team, which I think is going to be quite a bit, I think that's going to be enticing to free agents. I do. I think that it's going to be enticing because Jeter basically is synonymous with winning no matter what. And I think he's so influential in this next generation of baseball players that, yes, it's going to be about money when you're a free agent, but I also think it's going to be about playing with Jeter. I think he exudes winning, and I think the Marlins could use that.
Now, other news out of the weekend, Ice Cube may not have messed around and got a triple-double, but he did enough to best Lavar Ball in a 4-point challenge at the Big Three. Maggie, Lavar says he can beat MJ, but he can't even beat Ice Cube. Is it time for him to sit down and be humble?
Yeah, my father-in-law is a former philosophy professor. He wouldn't see the logic there is what I'm getting at. If you can't beat Ice Cube in a 4-point contest, I don't think you can beat Michael Jordan. No, I mean, listen, this is funny, right? Is it no longer about any of Lavar's, basketball playing skills at this point? It's only about the kids. So I think we're all expecting Lavar to sort of come up short. Not against Ice Cube, though. That one was a little shock.
And it's about the Lavar Ball character or caricature, if you will. If you're watching this video, even when Ice Cube was making shots, Lavar Ball was celebrating. So this reaction to everything Lavar Ball says, especially in the sense of he could beat Michael Jordan or whoever he could defeat, Zeus and Hercules combined. Duh. He's going to say that stuff. We really shouldn't be analyzing it.
No, I think the stuff that gets really gets people upset is the stuff about Lonzo and saying that he's better than Steph Curry and all that. All right, no matter which team you're a fan of, we're all rooting for Chad Bettis. Bettis is our adrenaline performer, presented by Toyota. Let's go places. Now, Bettis will make his first start since September 30th. The righty was forced to undergo surgery and chemotherapy treatments while battling testicular cancer. He was first diagnosed in November, but then had a recurrence of his cancer in March. And Bettis' return, it could not come at a better time. The Rockies are tied for both wildcard spots in the National League. Bettis went 14-8 last season with a sub-5 ERA. He pitched 186 innings and notched 138 strikeouts. We are so happy to see Chad Bettis, someone who really went to hell and back twice to have to be dealing with cancer, is now going to take the mound. Yeah,
obviously the baseball part is secondary. I'm sure he's very happy to be out on the mound, as are the fans of the team. But I echo your sentiments. I'm happy to see him on the road to recovery there and wish the same for everyone suffering from cancer or other illnesses.
He said getting the call that he was going to start today was like waking up on Christmas morning. All right, we didn't start the show in such an uplifting way, but at least we can end it with an uplifting story. We hope that set your Monday on a good path. Of course, we're going to be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, but you can stick with SI.com for all the latest news and headlines. You can follow us on Twitter at SI Now Live, where we will be sharing clips from the show. See you tomorrow.